All right, we are back with another episode of the Four Trained Savages podcast. This is episode number 75. Tyler, only 25 away from the big 100 this time.
Fired up.
And as we promised, we would be having during this time where there is no baseball being played, no, obviously, because we're in the off season, but there's not even any moves being made because of lockout season. So we delivered, and we're having some guests on this off season during this time when there's no baseball. And we have now recurring guest, James Smyth of the Yes Network. And now, James, you are dabbling in the podcast world as well with Towing the Slab with David Cohn and David Shackle. James, how we doing, man? Thanks for hopping back on. How you been?
Great. Thanks for having me back on, guys. Good to be back.
Good to have you. Good to have you. Yeah. So last time we spoke to you, I want to say, was it June or July? It was over. It was still, I think it may have been prior to the All-Star break, but
I was so sick. I was so sick during that time as well.
I think it was June because I think it was before the break and it was right after I got back in the booth, which was mid-June. So okay. I think maybe late June, I think.
Yeah, we talked about Glaber hopefully having a big second half too. You know,
yeah, I guess he was a little better, but
a little above average. Yeah,
but still a little underwhelming there.
Yeah. So, before we hop into it, if you guys are just listening to this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on our social medias, as well as follow James on Twitter and his Instagram. And be sure to subscribe, leave a rate and review if this is the first time. And thank you for joining us on the pod. So we'll start there, James. I mean, when we left you off, it was still kind of a disappointing time mid-season. We were like, what is this team going to be in the second half? We were very confused on what they were going to end up being. And obviously the result, we had that 13-game winning streak and they looked like they were really turning a corner. And then they went ahead and started to lose again and going on these skids. And the one thing that I always said with this team that you said to us on that podcast when we had you on before the first time was like, if this team, like the 2021 Yankees were like the perfect case study for just being so obscure and so odd. It was crazy. So what did you make of the ending of the season and kind of how everything played out before we get into what they're going to do for 2022?
Haven't, I've seen, I'm 35 and I've seen a lot of baseball. That was just one of the weirdest seasons between, like you said, the really high peaks and the really low valleys, just individual games where they, some big comebacks, but also some really terrible blown leads. It was just a weird year. And then it, fell off like a ton of bricks at Fenway in October. But it was interesting because when I was on last time and we were talking about the oddly underperforming offense, and I guess they did hit a little bit better in the second half, and the Rizzo and Gallo additions provided a brief jolt, but then they both kind of tailed off again, and it never really came together. It was just a weird year, but at the same time, they win. They still made the playoffs, 92 wins, but it just didn't feel like a great team.
Yeah, such a weird team, man. It was just
frustrating team.
Yeah.
James, before we hop too far into Yankee stuff, I know you are certainly like the stats guy. You're all in the advanced metrics and being able to measure players' productivity. I'm a big numbers guy myself, certainly not to your extent. I think a little more than Rob would like me to be at times. But in kind of this new era of analytics and advanced metrics coming out, like what feels like probably every day, especially to maybe the older baseball fan, what's like your favorite metric to use when measuring a player's production? Like, are we thinking OPS plus, weighted runs created, FIP for pitching, Sierra? What's kind of like your go-to for someone that may not, have too much experience in that field?
It's really easy to get, bogged down or off track or really get too lost in the weeds and stuff. And look, I like a lot of fans, I'm into it. And obviously I got to stay up on it to an extent, as far as like my job goes, but really it doesn't have to be too complicated. I think for batters, either OPS plus or weighted runs created plus are a good go-to for judging a hitter because it compares the player to the rest of the league, to the league average, and every point above or below is a percentage above or below the average. So you guys, obviously, you guys have said you're familiar with this, but so a league average OPS plus being 100, and then 110 would be your 10% better. 95 would mean you're 5% worse, and you go from there. I feel like with those two, it'll get you pretty much all the way there for just a quick glance gauge at how's this player doing this year, or how's this player's career comparing to this other guy. For pitching, I think ERA plus is the pitching version of that, and that'll also get you a good part of the way there. Comparing players to their peers. And I like how both stats, or OPS plus, ERA plus, weighted runs created plus, it all also includes the ballpark element. Yeah. So they'll adjust. If a guy is putting up crazy numbers at Coors Field or Cincinnati or Boston or Cleveland, that's on one side, and then you have other guys that might have numbers tamped down by playing in San Francisco or San Diego or wherever. And it's a good way to kind of balance that out, because that's something that's intuitive to every fan, every baseball fan, young, old, into the newer stats or not. They all have ballpark adjustments in their own head. That's a hitter's park, that's a pitcher's park. That's something that is unique to baseball, and I think it's a great fun aspect of the game, and it's something that people kind of get anyway. So any of these kind of adjustments that are made for player stats, for hitting, pitching, and these are the kinds of things that go into WAR too. So, and obviously WAR trying to be a catch-all number, that's also a good one too, because it's just trying to add everything together. How are you at the plate? How are you in the field? How are you running the bases? And it kind of puts it all together.
Oh yeah. Speaking of ballparks too, I mean, not like we saw, any ballparks come into play, especially not in the wild card game this year against the Boston Red Sox with, Giancarlo Stanton or anything.
Yeah, it's a tough break. It's
me being salty months later.
Oh, I hear you, man. I hear you. And it's just one of those things. You hit a ball, you hit a high pop, 315 down the left field line, and it gets out. You hit a rocket out to left center, out into the triangle there. When it gets up to around 420, and it stays in the park. Fenway game is kind of like a reverse Yankee Stadium, where in the Bronx, right field's really small, left field's gigantic.
Yeah.
And at Fenway, you have the left field and the Green Monster throwing things out of whack, but right field's actually pretty big.
It's a shame we couldn't win a few games here and there when we had close games when we're up in the ninth inning and we have a few blown saves here and there. I'm not going to name any names or name any games, but I think we all know what we're talking about.
There's about a dozen to pick from there, and since they ended up tied in the standings, one game swing would have put that game in the Bronx.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hop into the 2022 Yankees and kind of an outlook. So, a lot of you're on Yankees Twitter. You see what's happening just all the whole, it was like an NBA free agency frenzy that happened. And, we'll see if Rob Manfred and MLB kind of takes note of that and implements it in kind of like a deadline situation. But it was crazy with Seager getting signed, Simeon getting signed, and then Scherzer and all these dudes. And the Yankees there's a lot of players that they were in rumors to be looking at, like a Verlander and stuff. So, we saw what was happening on Yankees Twitter of their frustration with not getting anybody and not making any big moves. And we understand the frustration that goes along with not making moves when you see, other teams getting better and the guys that you wanted going elsewhere. But then you got to kind of say, okay, it's not over. we have to see what else they do at the end of this lockout. And whenever that hopefully is lifted and we could start getting back into baseball and get ready for pitchers and catchers. But what did you make of the moves that were being made? Do you still have a positive outlook for what they could really do in free agency? And what's like the big fish that you're trying to catch if you're the Yankees that you see that maybe fits this team? Like, whoa, this guy fits them perfectly, or this guy would really kind of help them along the way?
Well, first of all, I was really surprised, and I wonder if you guys were too, at how much activity there was before the lockout.
Ton.
We've been so used to nothing at all happening until January and February, and especially with the lockout looming, figure our team's going to want to pick up guys and make moves, with this axe kind of hanging over everyone's head. And now looking back, you say, well, teams wanted to have some certainty in their roster building for going into the lockout, and players want to know where they're going to play. So maybe it's not as surprising in hindsight, but I was definitely struck at first, and I think most people were too, at just how much activity there was.
Mm-hmm.
I get the frustration that fans have as far as hey, there are some moves that need to be made, and they haven't really. The one thing I'll say though, and you mentioned it too, it's like, hey, off season's not over yet. If take a look at the roster on opening day, and if you don't like it, kick and scream all you want, but let's cross that bridge when we get to it. I think there's one guy that's unsigned, and I think that should have been their target going into the offseason, and he's still there. So I'm not worried about it until he goes elsewhere, and that's Carlos Correa. He is a up the middle superstar in his prime. He's young. He's hitting free agency earlier than most other players do. I think that
is that because of sorry to cut you off. Is that because of because I heard is that a true rumor of the Astros were okay, or I don't know if that was a fake tweet. Maybe I'm getting dubbed there. Why is he able to hit free agency earlier?
Well, it's because he came up at 20 years old, so his clock gets rolling.
Oh, okay.
He's got 7 seasons in the big leagues, and he's hitting free agency going into his age 27 season. A lot of guys don't hit free agency till they're 28, 29, 30, 31. Aaron Judge was a guy who came up a little later, so he's a little bit older for a rookie, and then so he's just behind the 8 ball perpetually because he's going to hit free agency at an older age than someone like Correa. And Corey Seager was only a year older than Correa, so he's going to be 28. Correa's going to be 27. It's a little bit like when Machado and Harper were young free agents, a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And when guys are stars that young, one, it's a good predictor of how they're going to age and play really well throughout their prime, and also they'll hit free agency earlier and cash in. So then someday if Juan Soto or Vlad Guerrero Jr. Don't sign extensions, they're due to hit free agency a lot younger because they came up younger. Mm-hmm. And I just think Correa being just a stud at short, you can sign him to you don't have to worry about, if we sign him to a 10-year deal, is that going to go terribly? Some of those deals that go to guys deep into their 30s or even their 40s, where teams are paying the piper on the other end, you don't have to worry about that. If you're just getting a guy's age, 27 to age 36 for a 10-year contract, compared to guys where you're paying them, I'll pay you age 31 to 40.
Yeah. Does how is the back stuff? Does that alert you in any way? Because I know my feeling, and I've talked about this with Tyler, is I personally think that he makes the team better, and I understand, I want him, I would take him, but I don't know necessarily if he wants it, and I don't know if he's maybe possibly using the Yankees to kind of drive up his price with the rest of the market, if that makes sense. And I don't it's hard for me to believe that with the history, and I understand, I feel like Judge would come to terms with it, and the whole organization, it sounds like Cashman and everyone's is coming to terms, and they don't care what happened in 2017. But my skeptical stance on it is, why like he got dragged through the mud with what was said about him and how he was perceived in the media, especially because obviously it was with the Yankees and how they lost in 2017. And that's when it kind of shifted. But, you have the injury stuff. And then I just don't know if he is truly willing to say, yeah, I'll go to the Yankees. And it is possible that they could throw him the most amount of money, which is obviously money is king, but I just find it very hard to believe that he's willing to go over that, that history, which we have to see, obviously, if he ponies up and he's willing to go to the Yankees. But that's kind of my feeling. But what about the injury stuff? Is that on the radar for you and signing him, the back stuff?
Yeah, I mean, with anything like that, it is a concern, and similar to Corey Seager, he had some injury issues too. So it's not as cut and dried, but obviously, if I was, I'm just advocating for signing him. I mean, it's something to think about, but it also doesn't seem like it's anything too serious. Now, for a guy to have back issues or nagging injuries when he's 22, 23 years old, that's a bit of a red flag. But he's also been healthy for the last 2 seasons. He played all the way through 2020, shortened season, but he played all the way through 58 out of 60 games. And then this year he played 148 games. So
yeah,
I think between, that seems to be back on track. And also he's improved defensively. And when he came up, there were questions, is he going to have to move off a short soon enough, as a lot of guys do? Is he a future second baseman or third baseman? And he's become maybe one of the best defensive shortstops in the game.
He's probably the best defensive one on the market. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could talk ever with his arm too, in some standpoints.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Now I feel like going in the offseason, hey, they've said shortstop was going to be a priority. And all right. So that means you got to go out and get, Correa or Seager. Seager, I preferred Seager as being left-handed, maybe a better fit for Yankee Stadium, maybe a better fit for the lineup, but not as good defensively. Maybe he'd have to move to third base, a couple years into the deal. Whereas Correa is a better defender, and maybe a better long-term bet to stick it short. But now with Seager being off to Texas, then that's one guy off the market, and now it's kind of leaving Correa as the top guy left standing. I do, for just to put a little bow on that, just for fans being frustrated, I feel like if they get Correa and they have another like star contract locked in, they say all the hand wringing goes away about inactivity this offseason.
Yeah. All the crying and whining can be silenced very fast after this lockout, because whenever it ends, I mean, I think we all kind of expect things to move swift again, once it ends, right, especially if we start getting into that February time frame. But James, just to pivot real quick to another kind of position of need in some people's minds for the Yankees, center field. I know a big letdown for me, kind of, I think Rob as well, was, I mean, I was a big Starling Marte guy, and I think there's no argument that, when Aaron Hicks is on the field, statistically, he's, produces above average production. But, obviously, as of late, the problems have been he's just simply not available, when we need him. So what are your thoughts on the center field position moving forward? Do you think the Yankees were right on not going after Marte, paying an older guy $16 million after, Hicks's contract doesn't look great? It's not a horrible contract, not necessarily hindering them, but what are kind of your thoughts on center field moving forward?
It's a little thin.
Yeah.
So that's a tough spot. I feel like Marte was the only real difference maker there.
Dare I dream for Brian Reynolds?
It's a little. I mean, that's a little similar to maybe another big trade candidate that we hear a lot about, like Matt Olson. Are they going to be? Are they going to be able to get a guy? Do they have the pieces to get to swing a trade like that? But with Hicks, he's a very good player with attendance issues. When he's on the field, he's good, but he's missed a lot of time. As far as how do you pencil in the center field spot this year? Well, until he gets hurt again, it's got to be Hicks. But you just have to have the depth in place. I don't know what the back end of the market is for a guy, for anyone who has the ability to play center field. Could you sign, a fourth outfielder depth type piece who can play a corner? And then if push comes to shove, you can always slide Judge or Gallo over to center field.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be able to find a guy who might be a better fit on a corner right now than someone who could be a straight center fielder? Just looking at free agents.
I could think of someone, but it's pure obnoxiousness for me to even mention it in Nick Castellanos, but because that would never happen. But that's just a Yankee fan dreaming.
Yeah, well, he's a good bat, and that's somebody who's in that left field DH type of mode, and then they would be in one corner spot, and then one of the other outfielders could move over.
I did see someone on Twitter. It was a take that I don't know if they would do, but like say this is just me being weird, and if we want to get in another like outfielder like that, a corner outfielder, is to fix maybe a first base situation. We do have Joey Gallo that did play first base for a while, and he is, so maybe they could do some maneuvering there, but you probably are going to want him to play the outfield more so than play first base. But I don't know what you guys' thoughts on that would be.
I mean, he's a plus glove
really anywhere
in the outfield, and he played on the infield corners early in his career, but he hasn't played first since 2018.
Yeah,
he hasn't played third since 2017. I was thinking when they made the trade that they might move him around a little more, and who knows what'll happen this season. I also expected when we saw a lot of Judge in center field, I was a little surprised that we never saw Gallo move over to center field either.
Yeah,
but I feel like they both Judge handled it well. I think he was totally capable over there. And I kind of just expected that, they would dabble a little bit with, trying Gallo out there too.
Yeah. So we know that, shortstop was kind of coming in, was the big deal that we wanted to get the new shortstop, and can still happen. But me and Tyler had said repeatedly on this podcast that we think that the Yankees issues ran a little bit deeper than just getting a new shortstop and thinking everything was going to change. And we don't know how comfortable we are with rolling out basically the exact same team in a switch in shortstop. So you mentioned the Matt Olson trade. What do you think the kind of potential is there if we could get a guy like Matt Olson or a new if the deal, I think Freddie Freeman is going back to Atlanta, so I don't really think it's realistic. So but 180 million, I was like, you got to pay the guy a little bit more money. I mean, if the Yankees could actually pay him that, he'd take it. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is, do you see them kind of being okay with then doing a shortstop and then maybe just re-signing Rizzo? Because we personally kind of think that the issues run a little bit deeper, and we'd like them to because this is like, we were like, okay, this offseason, we're going to make some serious changes. Last 2021 was a huge eye opener to see that we're, trusting a little bit too much in these guys that, hope that they live up to their career peaks. And, they really didn't. And guys like Voit and Gio and unfortunately Glaber and Gary and Hicks. So, do you think that they're just going to kind of make a big shortstop move, or do you think that they would be, they are locked in, or not locked in, but they are motivated to do more throughout the rest of the team? Or is this kind of, it's like shortstop and we'll go?
I'm not sure, because, when the big push for a shortstop, it made it seem like, oh, are they going to be very aggressive to get one of the big guys? And then, Seager goes to Texas with little fanfare of the Yankees getting involved. And now it's like, well, all right, if they get Correa, I feel like that's their one big bite at the apple. Mm-hmm. As far, and then you might see smaller moves on the edges. If Correa signs elsewhere, then they're really left scrambling for a shortstop. And that's maybe where they would pivot to say, okay, we need to make a bigger splash somewhere else.
Story and Olsen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just, you mentioned like a possible Brian Reynolds trade. I feel like Olsen is the guy that fans have talked about the most as far as possible trade guys. I just wonder, he's absolutely one of the best first basemen in the game, and fans of every team would be talking about, hey, we need to trade for this guy. I wonder, as far as the farm system goes, do the Yankees have the pieces to get a guy like that? Are they going to be all in on say, hey, all right, let's trade these guys, we're going all in on Olsen? Or would some team, Yankees put out their best offer and then some other team could swoop in, with better prospects or something like that and grab them, which is why I feel like the free agent market is kind of the better way to go there, because you don't have to worry about your farm system and prospect rankings and trying to outdo some other team's prospect package. You're just, okay, it's a bidding process, and we're trying to lure, player A, B, and C over with just money instead of money and prospects.
Well, you're talking to prospect hugger right here, Tyler View right here, who is
not at all. Hey, I'm all for established players. That's why I mentioned, a guy like Brian Reynolds, because I'm like, hey, if Dominguez is a name that you'd like, I mean, by all means, that's kind of how I like to roll. I mean, I guess that's why I don't run the team, but just to kind of stick on the first base, I think it's almost fair to mention DJ LeMahieu's name when discussing the first base position for next year. DJ obviously not having a great year last year, hitting slightly below average. I'm going to throw Gleyber in this too. Who do you kind of expect to, if you had to guess, one of those two to kind of rebound to be where we expected them to be? I don't think any of us really expect DJ to necessarily be like a 140 OPS plus hitter for the rest of his career, like you had those two special seasons, if he was even around that. But kind of back to being above league average and being a really productive hitter, an important piece in this lineup. If you had to pick one, who do you have moving forward? DJ or Gleyber?
I will go with Gleyber on this, and I don't know, maybe we'll look silly because we can't all this season. It's when is it going to turn around? When is it going to turn around? Count me in for going back to the well with Gleyber this time. Just to have the 2 years that he had to start his career in 18 and 19, it is without precedent in baseball history to have a guy like Gleyber. I think it was he had a 125 OPS plus in his first two seasons combined. And for middle infielders to start off like that in their first two seasons at such a young age, the floor for those guys is perennial all-star and the ceiling is Hall of Famer. So it's just been baffling to see the 2020 and 2021 version of Gleyber. And even if he kind of balances out, not completely to the 18-19 level, but maybe a midway point for from his first 2 years to his last 2 years. So just since I have it up here, so Gleyber, first 2 years, OPS plus 125, fantastic, 25% better than league average. The last two seasons, 95, 5% below average. Yeah. So even if you took the midpoint of that and say 110 OPS plus, that would be fine for a second.
Yeah, a second baseman.
It would be a little disappointing considering how he started, but it would be a big improvement over the last 2 years. And I feel like that's an interesting little over-under to see, hey, what's a target number? Is he going to be better than that? Is he going to be below that? I feel like that's a good barometer to see how Yankee fans are going to, come down on one side or the other as far as still believing in Gleyber.
Oh yeah, I could be wrong on this, but I read something within the last 7 to 10 days on, I don't remember where, but if I know Gleyber stepped it up a notch when he moved to second portion of the year, not too long, it might be like 18, 20 games, but I think he had like 116, 118 WRC plus, something around there. So you could see the tick slightly as soon as he kind of moved to second base. I mean, it passed the numbers exam, and then I think it passed the eye test as well. So if
Right.
Glaber gets a full year at second, I'm hopeful again, and I hope as well, for the sake of all of our happiness and health, Glaber has a productive year at second base.
Yeah, so 19 games to finish the season since the slide back to second, and he hit 300, 372 OBP, 443 slug. That's an 815 OPS with a 300 average. It's only 19 games. We also don't know, the correlation and causation. Is it a coincidence because he moved back to second base? Was there something to it? We have no idea, and I guess we won't really find out until we get a full season out of him next year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's going to be interesting. Like coming into this offseason, it's like, what are we going to do shifting around the infield? And obviously Gio's coming back. And when you add in a new shortstop, and it's going to be very interesting once this lockout ends to see what the hell they do with everything. It's just like, because, having DJ and signing him this year, it just makes it a little complicated, obviously. And I agree with both of you in wanting to stick with Glaber and see him at the second base position for a full season. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit off from the Yankees. I wanted to ask you about towing the slab with Coney and Shackle. So I wanted to ask you, so far you guys have had some great conversations with some big name guys, and I've listened, and I think it's a great podcast. And you guys got the mix of like the broadcaster with the ex-player and the statistician, and it's really cool. What has been personally, I'm going to put you on the spot, what has been like your favorite conversation guest so far? Like what was like something that you said, whoa, this is cool. Like I love talking this and having this conversation with this guy, or just like the overall, topic of conversation that, was really good, that you thought that listeners was like, was really good for listeners to hear?
Well, thanks, first of all. And, it's a little tough. It's you're gonna ask a parent, who's your favorite kid?
But putting you on the spot.
Maybe it's a little bit of a recency bias, but we recently had Tom Glavine on.
Yeah.
And I loved that we touched on two relevant things. One was like his pitching career, obviously great, and also touching on the labor issues, which was a good fit with him and Coney being two of the prominent union guys back in the 90s. So it was a good window into that. I like how we've been able to kind of go back and forth between, retired players and active players. We had both Cy Young winners come on in the week or so after they won the awards. It was great talking to Robbie Ray and Corbin Burns, two guys who had absolute stud seasons this year.
Mm-hmm.
Were you surprised at Ray's contract? I did listen to that episode. I do have to go and listen to Corbin Burns. So were you surprised, just out of curiosity, on that?
A little bit. Not so much that, he got 5 for 115. What I was a little surprised by was the fact that he got 5 for 115 right after the Jays got Gausman at 5 for 110.
Yeah.
So they were both out there. The Jays made their choice, like, hey, we're going to give basically the same contract to someone outside the organization instead, which
in a whole different league too.
Yeah, it was a little bit. It raised my eyebrows a little bit that they went with someone different as opposed to their own guy.
Yeah, that Roto is looking pretty deep now, though, for the foreseeable future in Toronto.
Yeah. Toronto, oh yeah, and they locking up Barrios long term, and you have Gausman and Rios. They still have Rio for another year.
And Manoah's like one of my favorite guys over there too. He's just, he tortured the Yanks a couple times this year.
Oh yeah, and then you wonder, is someone like Nate Pearson ever, going to be healthy? And that's another guy that can contribute. And we know how terrifying their lineup is all the time. Seeing them 19 times a year facing the Yankees, and their pitching's not too shabby either. They're going to be a beast to contend with for a while, although losing Simeon and Ray, I think, is big there too.
Yeah, it almost feels like, they did lose this, MVP candidate and Cy Young winner. It almost feels like they haven't gotten much worse, though, because of how deep
They have so
that
much
lineup
offense.
is.
So
Yeah.
much offense.
And, you know, I think we list so many guys and then Teoscar Hernandez's name comes up where, you know, that dude is one of the better outfielders in the whole league.
Yeah.
It's crazy how
it's
deep
weird
they
that
are.
he's underrated, but it's basically, it feels like he wouldn't be if he was on any other team.
Yeah,
But he kind of gets
exactly.
lost in the shuffle with Vlad and Bo Bichette and you know, and the studs that they have in that lineup.
Started the All-Star game, I think.
Yeah.
For I would say probably my favorite episode was definitely when you guys had on Joe Torre.
Oh, that was
like
great.
that one.
That was
I like
phenomenal.
one a
Yeah,
lot,
that
too.
was phenomenal.
I like that one. Did Rich ever? Rich has a picture of him with Joe Torre when he was super young. It was kind of funny that
Nice.
I'll have to tell him to show you one day. But some more non-Yankees at least related. Well, actually, there are some Yankees on the ballot. What do you think of these the 2021 Hall of Fame ballot and all? Like, there's a lot of controversy going back and forth. I mean, like there's you know, guys leaving off Bonds and leaving off the steroid guys, and then I sent Tyler something that was a little, I guess you could, you know, it's going to be interesting to see, especially with this ballot, with David Ortiz getting a couple check marks and his name. I know that, you know, Red Sox fans will jump down our throat and say, well, he wasn't actually legit. He was just, his name was on a list. Nonetheless, he was associated with it in some way. So there may be a little hypocrisy there. I just wanted to put that out there, and I'll continue to talk about it on this podcast. Because I think all the steroid guys should get it. That's my personal feeling. So I think Ortiz should be in. I think A-Rod, I think Bonds, and everybody. But what do you think of like the Hall of Fame ballots so far? Who would be on your ballot, at least, if you can give us a little insight on what you think of that? Just you know, because we got to talk. You know, we got to talk. There's not so much availability to talk about players, at least for a lot of these writers and stuff, because of the lockout. But so it's a lot of Hall of Fame talk until the lockout ends. So what do you think of the Hall of Fame ballots?
Well, I'm interested every year as someone who loves the history of the game, and I'm a big baseball history guy, and so it does interest me each winter. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with some of the ballot collecting that goes on online and on Twitter. Ryan Thibodeau collecting the ballots from writers as they come in and tabulating, you know, where the vote stands. You know, we've got 20 ballots and we've got 30 ballots and we got 40 ballots in, and up until the announcement gets made. So you kind of track who's doing well and who isn't. I think we're heading for another baseball writer shutout like last year. I don't think anybody on this ballot is going to end up getting in this year. I think the big thing, obviously the big story, is Bonds and Clemens in their final year
Of
on the ballot.
yeah.
And you know, they ticked up a little bit for a few years, but they've kind of leveled off. They were both just a tick under 62% on last year's ballot, and they got to jump to 75 in 1 year. That means that they would basically have to take about a third of the no votes right now and turn them into yeses to jump over the 75% mark. I don't
It's a tough hill.
see that happening.
Tough sell.
So, you know, they were gaining, you know, a few points, 5 points a year here and there. And then it's kind of leveled off lately. So I don't know if they're going to make that jump. One possibility is writers that have taken more of a hardline stance, saying, okay, wasn't voting for them as a sort of punishment for the first 9 years, but now that this is the only chance they'll get, maybe it's like, okay, they took the punishment, and then it's like, all right, I'll add them in the 10th year because they'll never have this chance again. Maybe we'll have some voters like that. I don't know if it'll be enough. So I guess we'll just stay tuned there. You mentioned a couple of the new, the two most notable new guys on the ballot, also with a PED tinge to it, A-Rod and Ortiz. I think Ortiz will get a lot more consideration and votes.
I think he's going to get in, and I think
he'll get in.
I think he's going to get in, and like I said, like I just think it's hypocritical. Like I think all of them should be in, and then you're going to get a guy, you know, I know Andy was a little bit more like in the news that he did take some stuff that he wasn't aware of that was PD or performance enhancing, or I don't know the exact, clarification of what it was, but like, I don't know, man. It's just, this is where I think baseball is holding themselves back a little bit. And I just think that, like, if you let a guy in like that, and then the rest of those dudes are going to look back and be like, what the hell's going on here? I mean, like, to see the story of them in the game, and you can't write the story. I mean, the time where baseball was probably at its peak in comparison to the other sports was like early 2000s, when those guys were hitting bombs, and like, it's such an important story to the game, and they're not even going to be in any mention. It's crazy. It's crazy to me.
Well, I do think, and I mean, you see it in the vote totals too. I think a lot of voters do draw the line. There's a reason why, Bonds and Clemens, as controversial as they've been, they've gotten over 60% of the vote, whereas guys like, Manny Ramirez might only have 25% of the vote. People draw a line and say Bonds and Clemens, it wasn't against the rules back then. It's even same thing with David Ortiz. Whatever happened with the survey test in 2003, that was the survey test. That was them checking to see what is the level of PED use in the game, and do we need to start testing? So I feel like a lot of people will draw a line and say, okay, anyone from before testing went into place, when it was, it's been called the Wild West, or just where there weren't rules in place. There wasn't testing, there wasn't penalties, there weren't suspensions. It was just a free-for-all. Hitters, pitchers, it was just very widespread around the game. And you just compare players to their peers. So, okay, guys in the 90s, hitting 40 home runs in a season back then isn't as impressive, or doesn't stand out as much compared to other eras. But Bonds and Clemens kind of stand head and shoulders above whatever Hall of Fame benchmarks you have.
Yeah.
And also those guys, the documented usage that they had, from the late 90s on, these guys were Hall of Fame players, inner circle level Hall of Fame players, even before any of that.
That's what I was going to say. Before Bonds's neck became the size of, Kingdom Come. I mean, you could put him in for half of his career from the Pirates, and when he was like I don't want to say like a frail, but like skinny and like
skinny dude,
skinny dude, and he's still making amazing putting forth amazing numbers. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, as it like kind of trails in, I don't see them really getting in, and it's just kind of a shame, to be honest. And I just, it's disappointing. It's disappointing.
Yeah, but there's there's a lot of interesting guys and deserving players that kind of get swallowed up, all the oxygen getting taken up by all the controversy. But and then there's someone that I've always thought was a great player, especially at his position, Scott Rowland. And I think that's something that's come along over the last few years. This is going to be his 5th year on the ballot. Now, 3 years ago, he had 17% of the vote. Then he jumped to 35, and now he's at 53. So I think he's well on his way to induction. I don't think he'll go from 53 to 75 in 1 year. So that's when I said I think the writers will pitch another shutout. I think it's because someone like him or like Ortiz will, get closer, but I don't think it'll go all the way. So I think we'd see Rowland make another jump this season, and then I think you'd get in next year to kind of finish that climb. Looking at the rest of the ballot, you guys asked, what my 10 would be. I would go with Bonds and Clemens. As far as guys who are holdovers, I go Bonds, Clemens, Rowland, Manny. I feel like with A-Rod and Manny, I know I'm just saying, there's a line between guys that had the steroid cloud around them from before there was testing in place. I feel like there should be a significant, I don't know, what do you call it? A downgrade or something as far as a penalty for guys like A-Rod and Ramirez, who did actually break a rule and were suspended. I don't know. I don't think it's 100% disqualifying. I don't think it should be where you'd become banned from consideration if you got suspended. But I feel like it would be a big mental asterisk or downgrade in your head. That said, I think A-Rod and Manny, kind of clear the bar there. Whereas if it was somebody that was more borderline, that had a suspension on their record, I might leave them off. But I feel like those two guys are clear there. Bonds, Clemens, A-Rod, Rowland, Manny, Sheffield, Andrew Jones, who I feel like has gotten
I love that.
very little consideration, considering
He was a stud.
yeah, and I mean, everyone when he was a player, he was like, "Hey, here's the best defensive center fielder since Willie Mays," and he also hit 400 homers. And yes, his career fell off a cliff after he turned 30, but I feel like his first 10 years, are worthy anyway. So even if he didn't end as strong, I feel like he did enough at his peak to justify it, and holding him in comparison to the other Hall of Fame center fielders, I feel like he would belong and maintain the standard for Hall of Famers in center field. My last three would be Todd Helton. A little bit of a borderline case to me, but it's sort of like someone like maybe Fred McGriff, someone who was a little, on the edge, leaning yes. Even when you account for Coors Field, I feel like his 316 average, 414 on base, and 539 slug with 369 homers. Yes, Colorado does inflate home numbers, but so a lot of great players have benefited from their home ballparks that were hitter friendly. I feel like he's just over the line there. Ortiz, even with the PED issues, I feel he's, compared to his peers, an elite hitter. And you guys talked about, the story of baseball. You cannot tell the story of baseball over the last 20, 25 years without David Ortiz.
Unfortunately.
He is, yes, but he is one of the main characters in this story of the game we love. And the last one I would add on is Billy Wagner.
Yeah.
I know relievers kind of they're kind of on their weird little sidebar there. And if you were to say sort all the candidates by career WAR or something, a reliever or Wagner wouldn't be anywhere close to that. But I feel like you have to compare players at their position. And
yeah, he was a top guy.
Right. And if you say, okay,
for a while too.
Oh yeah, a very an incredibly productive career. And now he's a little short on innings compared to the other Hall of Fame relievers, but only 903 innings, but a 2.31 ERA, which is a 187 ERA plus, which is absurd, and 422 career saves.
Yeah.
So he had some longevity, and he was still an elite closer into his late 30s, and he retired at the top of his game. And I feel like if you were doing this from scratch, maybe there aren't as many relievers in. I mean, I think you can make a case that maybe Mariano Rivera is the only reliever to provide that kind of value compared to some of the other shorter career relievers. But if now we have a growing list of, I think we're up to 8 relief pitchers in the Hall of Fame. Among them, his contemporaries like Mariano and Trevor Hoffman. And I feel like with those guys in, Wagner belongs as far as an all-time great reliever.
Well, I'd say too, like, because of the new age baseball and the way that the game has progressed, I think we should, at least in my opinion, we should see more relievers kind of being seen as like Hall of Fame level talent, because they play such an important role now in today's game, that especially now, of dudes climbing up the save records. Like, I think that it's going to kind of be held in a higher regard of like, this guy was dominant for 6 years, 7 years, and he was a lockdown closer and he helped them, win games, all-star appearances, yada, yada, yada. So I think that, I agree. I think that he should get in. I like your ballot, James. I think that that one passes the spell test.
I'm looking at Todd Helton's Baseball Reference page right now. And my God, I've been unappreciative, like especially from the year 2000 to 2005. I mean, 5 like absolutely unreal years. And, he's not putting up he had a couple above 40 home run years, but nothing crazy in the home run category. He's just a friggin' production machine, and he's on the field every day. It makes me miss when players, some players were on the field every day.
Yeah. And Helton, a Gold Glove first baseman. And like you said, so you mentioned the 2000 to 2005. So that's a 6-year run. Now, granted, it is Colorado and it is the early 2000s. So that's about as hitter friendly as you can get. Some eras are very pitcher friendly. Some are very hitter friendly. The 1930s were extremely hitter friendly. The 1960s and 70s more pitcher friendly. This was a hitter friendly time. Still, take that into account. You want to mentally bump it down a little bit in your head, whatever. Here is his average season for those 6 years: 156 games, 344 batting average, 34 homers, 116 ribbies, 120 runs, 49 doubles, with a 449 on base percentage, a 626 slug, and an OPS of 1076.
Yeah,
so an OPS plus of
absurd.
158. So that's a lot of numbers.
That's not bad.
Throwing out all over you there.
That's not
bad. That is just absolute monster production.
Yeah, that's a slash if I've ever seen one.
So we'll have to see what happens with the Hall of Fame ballots and see how it plays out. But like we said, I like the list, James. But yeah, Tyler, unless you have any other kind of pressing questions for James, I think we could kind of move on.
Real quick, James, before we let you go, maybe you can bless our listeners with some positivity or some hope or something. The Players Association and the owners, to get this needle to start kind of moving forward a little bit. What needs to happen? Is it like the arb years definitely need to come down? Is it like the league minimum that needs to come up a little bit? Because I think it's clear that, big guys are getting paid. That's going to happen. But I think the Players Association really wants to protect these middle tier players and these guys like, for example, Luke Voigt, who still haven't hit free agency yet and probably won't get a big contract in their career. What's kind of like the first stepping stone, you think, to getting somewhere?
I mean, the players are being shortchanged in that, one, over the years, the overall share of revenue in the game, more and more of it is going to the owners in the league, and less of it is going to the players. Within that, we know that aging curves have changed in recent years, where there's more and more production out of players in their pre-arbitration years, those first 3 years.
Yeah.
And also guys that are in pre-free agency years when they're in arbitration, but still, pecking their way towards free agency. I think in order to move money from the older, more established players down towards the younger players is moving arbitration. Right now it's 3 years before you enter arbitration. Some teams are able to squeeze a 4th year out of players for service time manipulation or what have you. I think if you move it from 3 years to 2, where once you hit 2 years, you can go into arbitration. I think that would get guys paid more and earlier. In their careers, and move them closer to free agency. Looking at the history of the players union and the collective bargaining agreement and everything, it's about having guys have fewer restrictions on their movement and ability to get their fair market value. I feel like arbitration would be a way to do that. That was a big key in the 70s, as far as getting salaries to jump in the game. And at first it was 2 years, and then it moved up to 3 in the 80s. So this would be moving it back to how it was in the early 80s, where players would have 2 years and then hit arbitration. So I feel like that's the main crux of it. There are, does that mean, do you also move the free agent? Instead of needing 6 years to hit free agency, do you only need to hit 5? Do you just do instead of 3 and 3, do you do 2 and 4, 2 and 3? Those are all things you got to figure out. But the whole crux of it is that the vast majority of players are in their pre free agency years, and they're getting not a requisite amount of salary from that.
Yeah. I hope we don't miss anything. Any regular season games.
Just give us baseball on time. Hopefully we can get it before pitchers and catchers, so we could start seeing some deals and and the Yankees get to make some moves so they can save our sanity, because
let's get a deal done February 1st.
Yes.
And there'll be a big feeding frenzy to make all the signings and trades and everything. Pitchers and catchers, we hit the Super Bowl, and then we go right into pitchers and catchers.
Yes.
We have a normal spring training and a normal 162 game
and,
season. Let's go.
And Yankees Twitter can stop being annoying on my feed.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So thank you, James. We'll kind of leave it off here. If you guys want to check James out more, obviously he'll be doing some stats for the Yes Network next season when the games come around, hopefully, if they start on time. But if you guys want to follow him on Twitter, he's at James Smyth 621, and you guys can catch him on the podcast with David Cohn and Shackle on Towing the Slab, so with John Boy Media. So James, thanks again for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on maybe sometime during next season, and we're talking about not such a annoying team to watch when it comes to just winning, losing, peaks and valleys. Hopefully we get to have some more sanity and say, all right, we're geared up for playoff baseball. But thank you.
Let's go win a division, baby.
Exactly.
Yeah, Rob and Tyler, thanks again for having me on. And we'll talk soon.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Appreciate it, James.
Absolutely. So as always, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Be sure to follow us at 4 Train Savages on Instagram, as well as 4 Savages on Twitter. And we will catch you guys next time.